as a Scottish citizen going through due process. But that information is all set out in the table on page 496.
Now, I'm going to take 2 groups of 3 so that we can get a few more. Peter first, and then.
From The Economist. As you say, you've set out very strong arguments for Scotland being part of a sterling zone, sharing it with the rest of the UK. However, the White Paper then adds a paragraph which doesn't appear to be reflected or echoed elsewhere in the paper on other topics, in which it says that it is possible that indeed it would be open to the Scottish people in the future to choose a different currency arrangement. Isn't this your get-out clause reflective of the fact that it is possible the UK government, for whatever reason you're unable to fathom, but a reason nonetheless, might not accept Scotland as part of the sterling zone, and that there is considerable disquiet, let's put it that way, amongst supporters of independence about the wisdom of a sterling currency zone?
Lee, please. Magnus.
Good morning. You are watching BBC News at 11 o'clock. I'm Jane Hill, live at Holyrood. We are staying with events in Glasgow. Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon still taking questions following the release of the White Paper looking to the independence referendum next year. Let's head back and hear the rest of the questions.
Share of UK assets against the debt we agree to take on from the UK. Could you be more specific about what those assets are, and do they include oil, for example?
Okay. First one, Peter, I'm sorry, page 10 or X in the preface, you'll see a list of things, including NATO, European membership, the Republic, where we acknowledge that the people of Scotland, for that matter, the people of the UK, when particularly pertinent with regard to Europe at the present moment, can choose a different policy if they choose to do so. So no, it wasn't a point we were just making about the sterling zone. It's a point we make in my introduction. And that is about acknowledging the point I made to the lady, I think it was from Radio 5 Live, that we don't just acknowledge this, we embrace the point that people in independent Scotland are entitled to make different choices. That's one of the entire points about being independent. Nicola, on citizenship and voting.
I was just going to refer Magnus to, I think it's question 617 of the 650 questions, who would have voting rights after independence. We're proposing a franchise the same as the franchise that currently exists for the Scottish Parliament, but we make the point that the Constitutional Convention, which would be established to draw up the written constitution, would be able to look in detail at the franchise and whether there should be any changes to the franchise in the future.
Now, the question on assets, I mean, certain assets are territorial, and these are obvious and easy, including, for example, oil and gas resources. Other assets are non-territorial. For example, the UK Embassy in Paris would be a good example. It may or may not be a good idea to have 8.3% of the UK Embassy in Paris. If it wasn't a good idea to have it, then you would offset it against other liabilities like the share of financing of the national debt. So it applies to that category, and there are a lot of them, incidentally, of non-territorial assets. Now, I'll take another 3 questions, and then we'll see how we proceed from there. Just gentleman at the front, please.
David Clegg from the Daily Record. Can I ask you about Trident? As far as I can see from here, it says removing Trident would be a priority. Would be with a view to the removal of Trident within the first term of the Scottish Parliament following independence, which would be 2021 by my calculations. How realistic do you think that is, and can you outline what the process would be?
Okay. Gentleman at the back, at the corner, yeah.
Nick Watt from The Guardian. First Minister, you said you're confident that you wouldn't have to join the euro, but every single country that's joined the EU since the Maastricht Treaty has been obliged, under the terms of their accession treaty, to agree to join the euro if they meet the Maastricht criteria, and that includes Sweden. And the only reason they're not in the euro is because they voted no in a referendum. What makes you confident that you wouldn't have to put that in your accession treaty, given that the European Commission's view is that a yes vote would not lead to the collapse of the United Kingdom, it would lead to you leaving the United Kingdom, so you'd have to sign an accession treaty?
And the gentleman next door.
From BBC News now. All your opponents have to do is ask awkward questions, lots and lots of awkward questions, and there's some answers that you can't definitively provide. Do you ever look in the mirror and think, we're going to run out of time here?
Could we have Trident first, and then I'll talk about my looking in the mirror or not.
This is detailed in question 315 in the Q&A section. I mean, our position on Trident, I think, is well known, certainly long-standing, and it's well understood. We want to see the speediest, safe removal of Trident from the Clyde. We set out in the white paper that our position would be with a view to having Trident removed within the first term of the independent Parliament. CND, as you will be familiar with, produced a report showing that could practically be done within a timescale of about 2 years. Obviously, that would be a matter of negotiation in terms of the process and the precise timescale, but our very, very firm position is as quickly as is safely possible within the first term of the Scottish Parliament being our aim and intention. One of the key benefits, one of the many key benefits of independence is that we get to make that choice, that we get to decide not to spend billions of pounds on weapons of mass destruction that nobody wants or is able to use, and invest that money on, for example, the childcare policy that we were discussing earlier on. So the position is set out very clearly as an issue of principle for this government, and we want to see that removal as quickly as is safely possible. Obviously, when you're talking about nuclear weapons, the safety is also of paramount importance.
And can I say to the gentleman from The Guardian, you rather make my point for me. There was a point during one of the European summits, I think it was last December, where David Cameron declared, of course, that lots of countries wouldn't join the euro, not just those with a formal opt-out like the UK and Denmark, but many other countries wouldn't join either. And the reason for that, of course, is it's obligatory to be in the European monetary system for 2 years before you can have euro entry, but it's voluntary as to whether you join the European monetary system. And when you say the only reason that Sweden decided not to join the euro is people voted in a referendum not to join, that actually makes the point. And the idea that euro membership is compulsory is completely wrong for these reasons, and that we outline in the white paper. And incidentally, I think that's one of the kind of canards which the No campaign were running for a while in this debate and have largely dropped since. And as far as finally looking in the mirror is concerned, well, what I think is, if you're in a political argument and debate, would you rather be in the positive side of the argument, outlining your vision for the future of the country, or do you want to be in a negative side of the argument, embraced in a deadly embrace with the Liberals, the Conservatives and the Labour leadership all together, pointing out all the dreadful things they think will befall Scotland if we become an independent country. And my view in politics is that the positive beats the negative, and if you've got a vision for the future, then that's the right ground to be on if you want to win either an election or a referendum. So looking in the mirror or not, we're on the yes side of this campaign, the positive side of this argument, and we will win this referendum. Now, I suggest 3 more questions, and then we'll call to a close. The Sunday Herald first, and then Andy.
3 more questions, says the First Minister of Scotland. We will pull away for now because we will talk momentarily to Alistair Darling, his reaction to what we're hearing. We will be back in Glasgow as well for reaction shortly. But before we talk to Alistair Darling, let's just remind ourselves of what we've heard in the last hour or so from Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. That news conference overrunning somewhat, as you might expect, a huge number of questions following the publication of the white paper. Just to take you through some of the key elements that we've heard in the last hour. The First Minister saying that an independent Scotland would tailor economic policy to suit Scottish industry and Scottish businesses. He promised there would be no rise in the base rate of tax. He said it would be in Scotland's interest to keep the pound, and the Bank of England would continue to be the lender of last resort. He also promised that Trident nuclear weapons currently based on the Clyde would be removed within the first Parliament. Announcements about childcare to be extended to 30 hours per week in term for all 3 and 4-year-olds, and also for vulnerable 2-year-olds. And in terms of housing benefit reforms, described what's become known, of course, as the bedroom tax. That promise there that the bedroom tax, as it's known, would be abolished within the first year. Well, you know, I'm sure that the former Chancellor, Alistair Darling, leads the pro-union Better Together campaign. He, of course, has been listening to everything here in Edinburgh and is with me. Good morning.
Hello.
It's all laid out there. This is what could happen.
There's absolutely nothing new here. You know, there's nothing they've told us today that they couldn't have told us yesterday. And they've ducked all the big questions, the fundamental questions, like how can they guarantee the pound? What's plan B if they can't get that? They've had to accept there's going to be a lot of negotiations to take place, and they can't deliver on those at the moment. They don't know what the outcome is going to be. And if you look at the promise on childcare, they can do that now. They've got every single power in the book to deliver more childcare now. Why are they not going to do it? Because Nicola Sturgeon, the Deputy First Minister, has just said, oh, the women would go to work and pay tax to the Treasury. That's our Treasury, it's not a foreign Treasury. It's absolute nonsense. They've ducked the big questions. I'm afraid they haven't answered any of the fundamental questions to which Scotland wants the answers.
But negotiations cut both ways, though, because if there was a yes vote, September next year, there would be negotiations on both sides. In England, your Westminster wouldn't suddenly wave goodbye without any discussions whatsoever. So it does cut both ways.
That's precisely my point. A negotiation means two people have got to agree. And when you look at the pound, for example, you would have to get an agreement that there would be a currency union. You'd have to get an agreement about the terms and conditions, about how much you could tax, spend and borrow. And yet Alex Salmond simply asserts it's going to happen. Now, we know from everything that's been said over the last few days, it's looking suspiciously like a non-starter. Even nationalists are having their doubts about whether or not they want to lock themselves into that straitjacket. So what is plan B? Scotland is entitled to know, before it goes to vote next September, what plan B is. Are we going to use the pound like Panama uses the dollar? Are we going to go into the euro? Are we going to have our own new currency? The point is that today was the day when Alex Salmond promised us he was going to set out the answers to all the questions he has ducked and avoided answering for the last couple of years. And he hasn't done it.
They do talk about staying with sterling. I mean, that doesn't...
But look, they've been saying that. This has been their policy for all of 2 years now, and they've been saying it will happen. And yet we know there would have to be a negotiation, firstly, in principle, as to whether two foreign countries, because sadly that's just what they would be, would actually enter into such a thing. And secondly, what are the terms and conditions? I mean, you'd have to have an agreement, as they do in the Eurozone, on how much you tax and how much you spend. And frankly, when you look at the Eurozone, many people would run a mile from entering into another currency union of that sort. So these are big questions, and if you haven't got a currency union, we need to know what the fallback position is. Savers need to know what currency their money would be kept in. People paying mortgages would want to know, well, what difference would an exchange rate make? These are fundamental questions, and instead of answering them today, he has simply done what he's done most of his political life. He simply asserts that it will be the case, and making claims in which, in some cases, there's precious little foundation for believing him.
They say it will be the case with negotiation.
Yeah, but a negotiation by its very nature means that you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And yet here you've got in this paper he's published today all sorts of things that are asserted as fact, whereas in fact, never mind the UK, what about the European Union? Now, this is the guy